This is what happens when corrupt cops finally meet the wrong person.
In this video, we'll delve into encounters where individuals assert their rights when dealing with law enforcement officers. Let's explore these situations in greater detail to gain a deeper understanding of the complexities and nuances that can arise during such interactions. Upholding and protecting one's rights when engaging with law enforcement is a fundamental aspect of a democratic society. Now, let's delve into some instances where individuals assert their rights when dealing with law enforcement officers, demonstrating that at times, it's the officers who may find themselves in challenging situations due to their actions and decisions. In the first scenario, the encounter began with a police officer approaching an individual who was openly recording their actions. The officer immediately demanded the person's ID and date of birth, which raised questions about the officer's motivations. The individual, keenly aware of their rights, declined to provide this personal information, explaining that they were protected by their right to privacy. Despite the individual's polite and respectful demeanor, the officer continued to press for their ID and date of birth. However, the individual remained steadfast, maintaining that their right to privacy and not incriminating themselves were fundamental rights.
Lower your camera. You're welcome to videotape me, but civilians don't have to be videotaped.
We'll see when your supervisor gets here. Why you keep approaching me?
He's heading out into traffic. I'm going to have to detain him if he heads out into traffic.
As the interaction unfolded, the individual informed the officer that they were live streaming the encounter to an audience of thousands. This transparency was a powerful tool in ensuring accountability and preventing any potential misuse of authority. The situation grew increasingly tense when the officer threatened to arrest the individual for not complying with their demands. The individual's response was assertive, stating that they hadn't committed any wrongdoing and accusing the officer of attempting to retaliate against them for their previous words or actions. During this exchange, the individual drew attention to the officer's aggressive body language and refusal to provide a clear reason for the stop, making it evident that they were well prepared to stand up for their rights. In the end, the officer decided to issue a ticket to the individual, who allowed it to fly away symbolically. This action underlined the individual's commitment to defending their rights and the assertion that any arrest would jeopardize the officer's qualified immunity. In another case, the encounter began with a police officer pulling over a motorist. The officer's tone and attitude were immediately unwelcoming and unprofessional, setting a negative tone for the interaction. The motorist, understandably uncomfortable with the officer's behavior, requested to know the reason for the stop. However, the officer failed to provide a clear explanation. The lack of transparency in the officer's demeanor raised concerns for the motorist, who sought clarity and respectful treatment during the encounter. The situation took a troubling turn when the officer reportedly called the motorist a loser, an unprofessional and derogatory remark. Although not captured on camera, the motorist asserted that this name-calling had occurred. The officer vehemently denied using such language. As the exchange continued, the motorist took the initiative to request a supervisor's presence, believing that a higher-ranking officer might bring a more reasonable perspective to the situation. However, the officer's conduct escalated as he insisted on detaining the motorist for filming near the police vehicle, even though this was within the individual's rights. A disagreement ensued about the legality of such actions, with the motorist citing the law that requires officers to identify themselves upon lawful request. This further fueled the tension between the two parties. The interaction became more intense with the arrival of another police vehicle, which was initially assumed to be a supervisor. However, the original officer continued to harass the motorist, asserting that filming was illegal. Ultimately, the situation ended when additional officers provided their names and badge numbers. The original officer left the scene, but not before an uncomfortable and confrontational interaction had taken place. In another event, the encounter involved a police officer who had pulled over an individual. The officer promptly requested the individual's driver's license, but the individual questioned the reason for the stop.
Driver's license, proof of insurance.
What'd I do?
I'll use driver's license and I'll explain to you.
I'm working on it. No, what'd I do first? Why you pull me over?
You get your driver's license?
No, what did you pull me over for? Tell me that first.
Sir, let me explain something to you.
And what's your, I know the law. No, you have to tell me why you pull me over.
I don't have to tell you.
This simple inquiry was met with an unwillingness to provide a clear response. The situation escalated when the officer attempted to physically remove the individual from their vehicle. This action was particularly troubling as it seemed to be a disproportionate use of force, given the circumstances. The tension further increased when the officer threatened to use a taser. This threat was a significant escalation in the encounter and was perceived as unwarranted by the individual. Despite the mounting pressure, the individual remained resolute in their refusal to comply with what they believed to be an unjustified use of authority. The individual argued that there was no valid reason for the stop, underlining their determination to uphold their rights and question the actions of the officer. This led to a standstill, with both parties firmly holding their ground. Eventually, the officer decided to issue a ticket to the individual, who chose not to escalate the situation further and accepted the ticket. In another case, an individual was driving their vehicle on a public road when they were pulled over by a police officer. The officer's initial reason for the stop was unclear, as they did not immediately inform the driver of the violation or the purpose of the stop. This lack of transparency was a source of frustration for the driver. Upon approaching the vehicle, the officer demanded the driver's identification and registration. The driver, fully aware of their rights, inquired about the reason for the stop before complying with the officer's requests. They were seeking a clear explanation of the violation that led to the stop. The encounter took a troubling turn when the officer asked the driver if they had any drugs or weapons in the vehicle. This question raised concerns about an unwarranted search and seizure, as the officer had not established probable cause or provided a legitimate reason for the inquiry. The driver, upholding their rights, refused to consent to a search of their vehicle. They questioned the officer's motives and insisted that the officer should first explain the reason for the stop and any potential violation before proceeding further. This principled stand underscored the driver's commitment to safeguarding their Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. The officer's continued insistence on searching the vehicle, despite the absence of probable cause, escalated the situation. The driver firmly maintained that the officer needed to respect their constitutional rights. Despite the tense exchange, the driver's commitment to their rights prevailed. The officer eventually decided to issue a citation for a minor traffic violation, concluding the encounter without a search of the vehicle.
Passed their proposal, and it comes after both Oklahoma and Florida passed laws that could punish people for posting videos online that include officers' personal information. Valerie Castro now with the push to restrict recordings.
In another case, an individual was peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights by recording a public demonstration in a city park. The demonstration involved a group of activists protesting a local issue. The person recording, hereafter referred to as the filmer, was not directly participating in the protest, but was there to document the event as a concerned citizen and amateur journalist. As the filmer was capturing footage of the protest with their camera, a police officer approached and questioned their presence. The officer's inquiry revolved around the reason for filming and demanded identification. The filmer, aware of their rights, calmly explained that they were exercising their First Amendment rights by documenting a public event and did not need to provide identification unless there was reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. The officer continued to press the filmer for identification, even suggesting that filming the protest might be construed as suspicious behavior. The filmer stood their ground, emphasizing that the act of recording in a public space was protected by the First Amendment. It also reminded the officer that no reasonable suspicion existed to warrant an ID check. As the interaction continued, a second officer arrived on the scene. The two officers briefly conferred, seemingly discussing the legality of the situation. Despite their initial skepticism, they eventually acknowledged the filmer's right to record the protest and refrained from providing identification. The 5 cases presented collectively underscore the paramount importance of understanding and asserting one's rights when encountering law enforcement officers. Regardless of the specific circumstances, these cases highlight the significance of individual knowledge, composure, and assertiveness in upholding constitutional rights and ensuring transparency and accountability in law enforcement interactions. One overarching lesson from these cases is that knowledge of one's rights is a powerful tool in safeguarding individual freedoms. These rights include the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, the Fifth Amendment's right to remain silent and have an attorney present during interrogations, and the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech and the right to record public events. These rights are the foundation of a just and democratic society and serve as essential safeguards against potential abuses of power. Furthermore, these cases illustrate the diverse contexts in which these rights may be exercised, from traffic stops and police interrogations to documenting public events and protests. Individuals must be prepared to assert their rights under various circumstances. In each case, the individuals displayed a remarkable ability to remain composed, confident, and informed, thereby ensuring that their rights were respected. People with a sense of entitlement can be quite vexing and are often challenging to collaborate with. So, what happens when they are finally held accountable for their actions? Here are some of instances of entitled individuals reacting strongly after being denied their demands. First, there was an entitled woman who got caught shoplifting in 4K resolution and still attempted to deny it. On February 27, 2022, police received a call from a shopping mall reporting a shoplifting incident. A woman was observed on the mall's high-resolution surveillance cameras stealing expensive cologne from Saks, a luxury department store. When officers arrived and confronted her, she initially denied any wrongdoing, despite the clear video evidence. The woman grew increasingly agitated, insisting that she hadn't stolen anything and accusing the store's staff of lying. The manager of the store informed the police that he had witnessed the theft on the surveillance footage and provided a detailed account of the incident. The woman was eventually arrested for shoplifting and resisting arrest after a tense confrontation. In another case, an entitled employee who had not received her salary for 3 weeks. Her frustration stemmed from her desire to be paid under the table, bypassing the necessary documentation and tax requirements. On June 10, 2022, she reported her employer for not paying her. When officers arrived to investigate, they discovered that she hadn't filled out the essential payment forms or provided the required employment documentation. Her manager explained that they could not pay her without these documents, and she was asked to bring them in. However, the employee was unwilling to cooperate and insisted that she be paid immediately. Her confrontational demeanor led to her termination on the spot, and she was charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct, as she refused to leave the premises. In another incident, an entitled individual became embroiled in a heated dispute with a parking enforcement officer. The individual's car had been parked in a no parking zone, and a ticket was issued. Upon returning to their vehicle and discovering the ticket, they became irate and verbally abusive toward the parking officer. They refused to accept the parking violation, insisting that they should be exempt from the rules due to their self-proclaimed importance. The confrontation escalated as the individual became increasingly hostile, eventually leading to their arrest for disorderly conduct and harassment of a public servant. Another case involved an entitled restaurant patron who believed they deserved special treatment. After ordering a meal at a crowded restaurant, they demanded that their food be prepared immediately and placed at the top of the kitchen's priority list. When the restaurant staff informed them that their order would be prepared in turn, the patron grew agitated and began berating the wait staff. They claimed that their status entitled them to preferential treatment and that they should not have to wait like other patrons. This entitled behavior resulted in the restaurant management calling the police to handle the unruly customer, who was then arrested for disorderly conduct and creating a public disturbance. Another incident revolved around an entitled neighbor who believed they could bend the rules to suit their preferences. The neighbor repeatedly encroached on a neighbor's property, disregarding property boundaries and local ordinances. When confronted by their neighbor and local authorities about their intrusive behavior, the entitled neighbor insisted that their needs and desires took precedence over anyone else's. They refused to acknowledge their wrongdoing and engaged in verbal altercations with both their neighbor and law enforcement. Eventually, they were charged with trespassing, violating property boundaries, and disturbing the peace. In another case, an entitled airline passenger made headlines for their outrageous behavior during a flight. The passenger became disgruntled when the flight attendants were unable to provide them with an upgrade to first class. They demanded special treatment and berated the cabin crew, insisting that their frequent flyer status and self-proclaimed importance should exempt them from the airline's policies. Their disruptive conduct escalated during the flight, causing other passengers to become alarmed. The flight had to be diverted to an alternate airport, where local law enforcement arrested the entitled passenger upon landing. They faced charges of endangering flight safety and resisting arrest. Another incident occurred at a high-profile event where an entitled individual felt entitled to privileged access. Despite having a standard admission ticket, they attempted to gain entry to a restricted VIP area, arguing that their status and connections entitled them to the exclusive section. When security staff denied them access and informed them of the rules, the entitled event goer became belligerent and aggressive. They claimed that they were above the event's regulations and could do as they pleased. As a result of their disruptive behavior, local authorities were called in to address the situation. The individual was subsequently escorted out of the event and charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. In another case, a property developer known for luxury developments set their sights on a piece of pristine coastal land. Despite clear regulations protecting this ecologically sensitive area, they began construction without permits. Local environmental groups and concerned citizens rallied to stop the project. The developer ignored cease and desist orders, believing their financial influence would exempt them from legal repercussions. Legal action ensued, resulting in a lengthy court battle. Ultimately, the court ruled in favor of the environment, imposing hefty fines and requiring extensive ecological restoration. In another case, at a renowned university, an entitled student came from a family with influential connections in academia. This student thought they could bypass academic integrity rules with impunity. They were caught cheating on exams, but instead of accepting responsibility, they attempted to leverage their family's connections within the institution to avoid consequences. The university upheld its commitment to academic integrity and conducted a thorough investigation. The student faced not only academic probation but also damaged relationships with faculty and peers, illustrating that influence couldn't shield them from the consequences of their actions. In another case, the owner of a successful business empire thought their wealth and connections made them immune to taxation. For years, they manipulated financial records to evade taxes, assuming their influential status would protect them from scrutiny. However, the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, initiated an audit that revealed the extensive fraud. The business owner found themselves in a legal quagmire, facing severe fines and the looming threat of imprisonment. This case serves as a stark reminder that even the most financially successful individuals cannot escape the consequences of tax evasion when the law is determined to bring them to justice. In a case that stirred controversy and challenged democratic principles, an entitled political figure believed they were above the law. Despite numerous allegations of corruption, the individual refused to cooperate with investigations and believed their political clout would protect them. However, an extensive inquiry, led by a dedicated team of investigators and journalists, unveiled a trail of illegal activities, embezzlement of public funds, and unethical dealings. The evidence was presented to the judiciary, which pursued charges relentlessly. This case became a symbol of accountability in government, demonstrating that even the highest-ranking officials are not exempt from the law's reach when transparency and accountability are upheld. The political figure faced legal consequences, showcasing the importance of the rule of law in a democratic society. Lastly, an entitled individual with an active felony warrant was discovered casually sunbathing in a park. Officers on surveillance duty noticed her and approached her to address the outstanding warrant. When confronted by the officers, she displayed a defiant attitude and refused to comply with their orders. She requested a female officer to conduct a search on her, but there was no immediate availability of one. Frustrated by the delay, she continued to resist the officers. The situation escalated further, and she even threatened to have the officers arrested. Ultimately, she resorted to spitting on one of the officers, which led to her arrest on multiple charges. In these detailed cases, we've witnessed a recurring theme of entitlement leading to confrontations with law enforcement and other authorities. Entitled individuals firmly believe that their self-proclaimed importance exempted them from adhering to rules and regulations that applied to everyone else. Their confrontational attitudes not only disrupted public spaces and interactions, but also resulted in legal repercussions. These cases serve as cautionary tales of the consequences of an entitled mindset and a lack of regard for rules and regulations. They demonstrate that while entitlement may temporarily provide a sense of superiority, it ultimately leads to public disruptions and legal consequences. In all these cases, law enforcement and other authorities were required to enforce the rules and maintain order, showcasing that entitlement does not exempt anyone from the law. While most people are typically just silly when they're drunk, others get very aggressive and want to fight. Here are some of the cases of intoxicated individuals attacking law enforcement officers. On a chilly December evening in 2021, a vigilant police officer on patrol received a report of a blue car exhibiting erratic driving behavior. Concerned for public safety, the officer promptly located the vehicle and signaled the driver to pull over. However, what followed was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse as the driver, later identified as Jamie Granger, decided to evade the law. The pursuit took a dramatic turn when Jamie stopped at a gas station, where she hoped to avoid the consequences of her reckless actions. Seemingly inebriated, Jamie denied the existence of the traffic stop altogether. The officer, despite her vehement resistance, managed to place her under arrest. What made this case even more unsettling was Jamie's state of extreme intoxication, which became evident during a field sobriety test. She seemed incapable of comprehending the test's instructions, and in a shocking twist, resorted to biting the officer's hand. This added assault resulted in the escalation of her charges, including aggravated DUI, compounding the legal trouble she faced. On a sweltering summer day in 2022, a diligent deputy sheriff conducted a routine traffic stop after noticing the disabled vehicle on the roadside. The driver, Andrew Olin, exhibited signs of impairment. As the deputy initiated the arrest process, Andrew seized a momentary opportunity to escape. A brief yet tense pursuit followed, and the deputy eventually managed to locate him. However, Andrew's cooperation remained elusive, and the situation took a dangerous turn. An altercation ensued, with Andrew aggressively resisting arrest. At one alarming moment, he made an audacious attempt to seize the deputy's weapon, threatening to escalate the situation even further. Deputies had no choice but to employ force to subdue Andrew and regain control of the situation. The resultant charges against him were severe and included aggravated DUI, battery on an officer, and an attempt to disarm a law enforcement officer, reflecting the gravity of his actions. On June 1, 2023, a shocking incident unfolded when deputies responded to a car crash at a gas station. The driver of a Ford Ranger had collided with a fire hydrant, and when officers arrived at the scene, they encountered an intoxicated individual. Frank Clement Jr. Frank admitted to consuming alcohol and seemed disoriented. However, what initially appeared to be a standard DUI investigation took a dangerous turn. As officers engaged with Frank, he abruptly approached them in a threatening manner, escalating the situation. The encounter quickly devolved into a physical altercation, during which Frank grabbed one of the deputies forcefully. A witness at the scene reported that it seemed as though Frank was attempting to reach for the officer's firearm. Deputies managed to subdue Frank and placed him in handcuffs. He was then provided medical attention for his injuries. The charges brought against Frank included driving under the influence, DUI, with property damage and personal injury, aggravated battery on a law enforcement officer, resisting an officer with violence, and reckless driving. This case serves as a stark reminder of the unexpected dangers law enforcement officers can face while performing routine duties, especially when dealing with intoxicated individuals who become aggressive. On July 25, 2022, a deputy conducted a routine traffic stop after observing a disabled vehicle. The driver, identified as Andrew Olin, exhibited signs of impairment, including slurred speech and bloodshot eyes. The deputy began a standard field sobriety test, which Andrew failed. The deputy proceeded to place Andrew under arrest, but as he attempted to handcuff him, Andrew managed to escape. After a brief pursuit, the deputy successfully located Andrew. However, Andrew remained uncooperative and non-compliant, ignoring the officer's instructions. During the confrontation, Andrew made threats toward the officers and initiated a physical struggle. At one point, he tried to seize the deputy's weapon, intensifying the threat level. The situation escalated to the point where Andrew had to be subdued forcefully. Following the arrest, he faced multiple charges, including aggravated DUI, 2 counts of battery on an officer, and an additional charge for attempting to disarm an officer. This case exemplifies the unpredictable and perilous scenarios that law enforcement officers can encounter when dealing with individuals who resist arrest aggressively. On December 4th, 2021, law enforcement officers responded to reports of erratic driving by a blue car. When an officer located the vehicle and initiated a traffic stop, the driver, later identified as Jamie Granger, attempted to flee. Officers eventually caught up with Jamie at a gas station. Initially, Jamie denied any wrongdoing and appeared to be intoxicated. She was subsequently subjected to a field sobriety test, which she failed. During this process, it became evident that Jamie was significantly impaired. Following the failed sobriety test, Jamie was placed under arrest. However, she vehemently resisted, leading to a struggle between her and the arresting officer. In the course of the arrest, Jamie bit the officer's hand in a desperate attempt to evade apprehension. This incident led to the addition of an aggravated DUI charge on top of her resistance and assault charges. The case underscores the unexpected dangers officers can face during routine traffic stops when dealing with individuals who exhibit extreme levels of aggression when intoxicated. One evening in March 2020, officers were called to a local bar in response to reports of a belligerent patron causing a disturbance. The officers arrived to find an intoxicated man, John Stevens, who had become unruly and confrontational with the bar staff and other patrons. When the officers attempted to calm him down and escort him out of the establishment, John's demeanor escalated into a violent outburst. John physically attacked one of the officers, landing punches and kicks. Despite their best efforts to restrain him, he continued his assault, even attempting to grab the officer's baton. Eventually, additional officers arrived at the scene, and they were able to subdue and handcuff John. He faced charges of assault on an officer, disorderly conduct, and public intoxication. On a September evening in 2019, a patrol officer encountered an intoxicated man, Robert Lawson, on a street corner. Lawson appeared disoriented and inebriated, raising concerns for his safety and that of others. The officer approached to offer assistance, but Lawson quickly grew aggressive and hostile. Despite the officer's attempts to verbally de-escalate the situation, Lawson initiated a physical altercation, striking the officer with a closed fist. He continued to resist arrest, even managing to wrestle the officer's taser from their holster. Backup officers soon arrived, and after a prolonged struggle, they successfully subdued and arrested Lawson. He faced multiple charges, including assault on an officer, resisting arrest, and attempting to disarm a law enforcement officer. In the early hours of November 2018, a patrol officer observed a vehicle swerving erratically on a quiet suburban street. The officer initiated a traffic stop to assess the driver's condition and ensure public safety. As the driver, Sarah Martinez, stepped out of her vehicle, it was evident that she was under the influence of alcohol. When the officer informed her that she was being placed under arrest for driving while intoxicated, Sarah became agitated and confrontational. She vehemently denied any wrongdoing and attempted to resist arrest, resulting in a physical struggle. During the altercation, Sarah tried to grab the officer's sidearm, posing a grave threat to the officer's safety. Fortunately, backup officers arrived swiftly and assisted in restraining Sarah. She was subsequently charged with aggravated DUI, assault on an officer, and attempting to disarm a law enforcement officer. The cases of intoxicated individuals attacking police officers provide a sobering reminder of the complexities and risks that law enforcement professionals face in their line of duty. While most people may become silly or uninhibited under the influence, a small percentage may exhibit extreme aggression and engage in physical confrontations with the police. These cases serve as stark examples of the challenges faced by officers tasked with maintaining law and order, even in the face of individuals under the influence. The incidents underscore the volatile nature of these encounters. In each case, officers were required to exercise their training and judgment to de-escalate confrontations and protect themselves from harm. It's important to recognize that these incidents don't represent the behavior of the majority of people under the influence, and many intoxicated individuals are cooperative and nonviolent when interacting with the police. Nevertheless, These cases illuminate the need for law enforcement to be prepared for unpredictable and potentially dangerous situations that can arise when individuals lose control due to alcohol or other substances. Officers must continue to receive training in conflict resolution, de-escalation techniques, and self-defense to handle such scenarios as safely as possible. Public awareness campaigns on responsible drinking and the potential consequences of aggressive behavior towards law enforcement can also play a role in reducing such incidents. The cases presented here serve as critical reminders of the importance of supporting law enforcement in their efforts to protect public safety and the necessity of ensuring their safety and well-being as they navigate complex and challenging situations.